Good evening and welcome to the Kentwood branch of the Kent District Library for the first presentation in a series called Bridging Political Divides, Exploring the Radical Middle, presented by the World Affairs Council of Western Michigan in collaboration with Kent District Library. I'm Erica Kubik, Director of Programming, and on behalf of my colleagues Rachel Brooks and Michael Van Denen and the Board of Directors of the World Affairs Councils of Western Michigan, I welcome all of you. The Council's mission is to empower the people and organizations of West Michigan to engage thoughtfully with the world. To change the world, we believe one must first know the world. And to learn more about what we do, please visit worldmichigan.org. Tonight, we say a special thank you to our friends at Kent District Library who annually partner with us to provide this free informational resource to the West Michigan community. I welcome Andy Erlewine, the chair of the KDL Board of Trustees, to share what's happening at the library and introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Erica. In partnership with those, it's partnerships like those between KDL and the World Affairs Council of West Michigan that can bridge gaps and make everybody stronger. Another key partnership that the Kent District Library has had since its founding in 1994 are its partnerships with local municipalities like the city of Kentwood. Many people may not know this, but KDL owns the books and the material, both physical and online, that are in the library, but the actual building is owned by the city of Kentwood, and that's the same for all 20 branches of the Kent District Library. And that arrangement of having the material and the employees coordinated by KDL, but the actual buildings owned by the local municipalities was a radical middle of the idea back in 1994. And that's those type of radical ideas that have served Kent County exceedingly well over the past 30 years. And now, to further speak about radical medical partnerships, we are pleased to introduce Dr. Doug Koopman, Senior Research Fellow and Professor Emeritus for the Departments of Politics and Economics at Calvin University. A graduate of Hope College, he moved to Washington, D.C., where he earned a Master's of Theological Studies at Western Theological Seminary. He then went on to study at the Catholic University of America, receiving a PhD in American government in 1992. His academic specialties are American political institutions and religion and American politics. Koopman joined the Calvin facility in 1995 after 15 years working in national politics. He has interrupted his studies or his academic work at times for assignments in politics, government, and higher education internships or leadership. After Doug's presentation this evening, there will be ample time for questions. Please exhibit civility to our guest and hospitality to others by asking respectful and succinct questions. His presentation tonight is titled The Radical Middles, Reconnecting the Frustrated Majority and Reviving Our Democratic Republic. Let's welcome Doug Koopman to the stage. It's all yours.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. I'm honored to be here, grateful to be here as a resident of Kentwood, Michigan, since 1995. I guess it's been a long time. That's almost 30 years, isn't it, honey? We actually live right on the border between Kentwood and Grand Rapids, near Calvin College and Calvin University, that part of Kentwood that's north of the malls. And so our backyard is flush against a small woods. Of course, there are a lot of squirrels in those woods, but I think it's somehow appropriate to note that in our backyard, the squirrels in our backyard actually, all the squirrels are from Grand Rapids, but the nuts are in Kentwood. I think that's just about squirrels and nuts and not really about people. But it's great to be here in this library, which is the place where we can vote early, at least in my precinct in Kentwood. This is the place that early voting, and if I encourage you to do that if you're not voting election day, to vote earlier. So I want to talk a little bit about just to describe what people are trying to do to you in Michigan and in Kent County and in this region. Really, for the last 10 years, national political figures have come here and reporters have come here, try to find out what's going on with we peculiar people in Western Michigan. And this year, the phrases were a swing county with swing communities in a swing state. And so honestly, the word swing never really connected to West Michigan very much in my recollection, having grown up Dutch and Reformed. But we'll work with that. So I want a lot of the presentation tonight is for you to be aware of what folks are trying to do to you and why are they trying to do this to you in advertising and political communication and in political campaigns. So part of it is education, but also part of it is elevation, to elevate the conversation and really demand a more elevated conversation around politics and issues this fall in West Michigan. We have a great opportunity to learn a lot and to some extent use this time of deliberating about an election to be educated rather than to be used by others who are trying to tell us other things. And so I put together this presentation, and to some extent it is an introduction to the three events this week and the week after and the week after that. But it also to some extent stands alone. So let's see if all this works. There it does. I have four things. Why Kent County is being watched by national figures. If you remember, it's not the last election day in the 2016 elections. Both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were in Grand Rapids that night, the night of the election nights. And we're watched because we're closely divided. And then I want to remind us a little bit of the legacy of public office holders and public servants in Western Michigan, kind of to elevate our memory of the best in politics and the best in government service. And then talk a little bit about political discourse or discussion or communication or advertising today, and how to sort of put that in a little context and kind of don't let the irritations bother you as you think about how to exercise your vote or how to enter into civic life. And then some opportunities and tools for action, always like, what can I do to make it a little bit better in my circle of influence or my circle of friends or my neighborhood. So those are the four things I want to talk about. And this is my metaphor about bridge building. And I thought about a bridge with these two high ends and a very deep cavern below, but that's actually not the American populace. We're not literally all far on one side and far on the other side with a chasm between us. We're more like this kind of a bridge that seems to be connecting islands or pieces. And that's how I want to think about bridge building that way, that we're all really more or less on the same level, but can we connect and listen well to each other? So that's my visual. Let's go. So, and I want to talk about, very quickly, opportunities for us this fall, for you and for me, to build on the attention, to challenge the traditional framing of what the other side is like and what our side is like, to elevate to higher principles, and then to influence the future. This is why people are coming to Grand Rapids and Kent County. So on the left, if I can point to the left chart for both of you, this is a very detailed map of the 2020 vote for President of the United States in Kent County. And I shaved off a little bit of the surrounding counties too, that tiny little border there are the counties next door. But this is something you would expect. This is the presidential vote in 2020 for red Republican and blue Democrat being obviously Joe Biden and the red Republican being Donald Trump. It's what you would expect. And one of the reasons a lot of people come here is because we're typical. So in some sense, the city is very democratic. The closer into the center of the city, the more democratic one becomes. There are also a few places where Democrats were strong over here, right in this little blue dot. But typically, the more rural you get and the more exurban you get, the more Republican you are. And then the darker blue, the more intensely Democrat, and the more red, more intensely red. There's actually not a lot of intense red in Kent County. So this is by township, by sections of cities, I think even by precincts. And so you can see way down in the southeast, like in the Caledonia area or down here, Barron, and up north to very Republican. So that's the actual vote totals. The other chart on the right is the change from the presidential election in 2016 that Donald Trump won to the 2020 election that Joe Biden won. And it's different data. It tells you the changes. And it shows that most of Kent County voted more for the Democratic side. The city, the suburbs, everywhere, but not every place in Kent County was more Democrat or less Republican in 2020 than in 2016. Up in the upper right-hand corner and the upper left-hand corner, those areas are actually even more Republican in 2020 than they were in 2016. So the one on the right is the 4-year change, right? So the question in front of a lot of national media's mind is, what's going to happen in 2024? And then there are some anomalies. Like there's a couple of precincts in the city of Grand Rapids that were slightly more Republican or less Democratic in 2020 than in 2016. That's because they were like 93% Democratic in 2016 and 92% Democratic in 2020. But the general trend you can see, much more Democratic, except probably out in these outlying townships and towns and in the corners of the county. There we go. And then a couple of data points about Kent. And we've been called by the media a swing region of a swing state. I think we're more of a trending region of a swing state. That the county becoming wealthier and more urban is trending toward the Democratic Party. I think eventually it will become, if the two political parties remain kind of the way they are, a pretty solidly Democratic county. I don't think it's quite ready to happen. But just some data points about how Kent County is a little bit different than the state. The personal income, like individual income, average personal income in Kent County is $10,000 more than the average in the state. So we're about per person $10,000 income wealthier than the typical Michigander. Family income is about the same, right? $8,000 more, 10% higher, so we're a bit wealthier. Post-high school degrees, compared to the state, we're more educated. We have more college degrees, associate degrees, law degrees, things like that. Pretty typical, but 6 percentage points more educated, more post-high school degrees than the state at large. And also our voter turnout is a little bit higher, which correlates with education and income. The more educated and the more income one has, the more likely they are to vote. So again, this makes us an attractive place for the media and others to look at us because we're compact, we're a bit more willing to talk to people, we can express kind of our political views, so we're just a prime place for people to show up and start asking us questions. And the other reason they come is that the national media has memories, little photographs or snapshots of Grand Rapids in West Michigan. And here's 4 photographs of sort of our legacy. To the far left is this guy is Arthur Vandenberg. I think he's got a statue downtown, I believe. And this guy, no, that's not Frank Perdue selling Perdue chickens. That's Harry Truman, President Harry Truman. Arthur Vandenberg, his famous contribution to American political history is a Republican, and the Republican Party right after World War II was a bit isolationist. They had won the war, and most Republicans wanted to withdraw back into the United States and leave Europe alone and leave Asia alone. And the Democratic Party, Harry Truman, wanted to create the Marshall Plan to engage with Western Europe and help build the economy and the democracies of Germany and other places, and then Asia and other places. And there was really a stalemate in the Senate for a period of time, and then Arthur Vandenberg rather quickly changed his mind and agreed to cooperate with President Truman on building the Marshall Plan and pushing it through the Senate because so much depended on treaties and activities that the Senate had to undertake. And so he is best known for, to some extent, switching sides from isolationism to internationalism to help Truman execute the Marshall Plan that rebuilt Europe after World War II. So I crossed out radical middle, although it's a fine term, into elevated middle, like Vandenberg setting aside partisanship and understanding what's in the interest of the nation and in the globe to move forward. The next two, of course, this is Gerald Ford, and this is a guy named Tip O'Neill, who eventually became Speaker of the House for the Democrats. And this is right after Ford became president, got the vice presidency because of the Spiro Agnew resignation, and of course president because of the Nixon resignation, and served the country well as president for slightly more than a single term. And then the last two are a couple of our local members of Congress, the late Paul Henry, who served from 1984 to 1993, and then Vern Ehlers, who succeeded him and served until, I think, 2010. Paul, known for working across the aisle on issues of science and education and federal funding for the arts and humanities, and Vern Ehlers working across the aisle on science and environmental issues. So we have a history in Kent County of actually putting country above partisanship very often, and something to appreciate for generations from the 1940s until close to the present day. Here we go. So that's kind of where we are. But we're supposed to feel good about ourselves now. We are a wonderful place that is characterized by public officials who often, not always, often set aside partisan interest to look for and then advance the common good. So that's the setting. Now, what's happening to us here, right? Well, this is sort of a matrix of, or a structure or ideology of the American electorate divided by political interest, by some ideological views, by cultural interest, by activities and things like that. It's put together by a group called More in Common, which sort of gives you a hint of what they think. I think we really have a lot more in common than we believe we do, even about politics. And they've done extensive surveys of all Americans, asking them bunches of questions, and they say basically Americans aren't Republicans and Democrats. They're in 7 different tribes, and these are arrayed. On the left is the most progressive or politically liberal, and on the right is the most conservative groups. And I just will read them. Progressive activists on the left, and the next is traditional liberals. You can go to a website and take the survey and find out where they would plug you. Not everybody likes where they're placed, but they're interesting categories. Passive liberals. In the middle, notice 26% of America is politically disengaged. Right? That's a chunk, right? Their political activity is characterized by none. No political activity. Then the moderates, they say, and the traditional conservatives, and the devoted conservatives. And you look at the percentage of the electorate, right? And the way on the far left is 8, way on the far right is 6, but there's bigger chunks in the middle. So, right. Now, this political discussion today, the problem is that the people on the ends are the ones who like the system the way it is. They like the conversation the way it is. They like the attack the way it goes. They like to characterize the other side the way the other side is characterized. And so most of our ads you get on TV and in the radio or things you get in the mail are the progressive activists saying, look at how crazy the devoted conservatives are, and all of us in the middle saying, yeah, if that's the way they are, yeah, they're crazy. Now, the thing is, there aren't that many people who are devoted conservatives. And then, of course, the other side is the devoted conservatives. Look how crazy those folks over there are. And everybody in the middle says, yeah, they seem a little unusual. And you seem super engaged in the political process, so maybe you know more than I do about those people on the other side. The fact of the matter is the political conversation is controlled by these 15% roughly, 8 plus 6, 14% of people who want everyone in the middle, the frustrated middle, to believe the worst about the persons on the far other end of the spectrum, right? And so that's the political conversation that we have. And we tend, because those are the only folks engaged in the political discourse, we tend to kind of go along, or maybe not quite believe it, but we don't have other sources of information or authority. Right? One thing More in Common does, and they work in cooperation with a group called Starts With Us, and I'll get this later, is perception versus reality. So on the left, they ask people questions about what political party do you belong, and then do you value this thing, right? And the blue lines, of course, are Democrats, and the red lines, of course, are Republicans. Do you believe in accountable government? Well, both 90%. Right? Rule of law, 90%. Representative government, 90%. That past informs the progress. In other words, appreciation for the past can inform what government needs to do in the future. Do you believe in personal accountability and respect and compassion? All those are 90 percentiles. That's all on the left. You think, yeah, we're actually, I am not the only normal person in the world. Almost everybody's normal, right? And then on the right is they ask, Well, they ask Republicans, do you think, what percentage of Democrats do you think believe this? And they ask Democrats, well, what percentage of Republicans do you think believe this? And those are 30%, right? So they think the other side, only about a third of the other side is actually okay, right? Believes in these fundamental values. And we think 2/3 of the other side is not okay, right? Because of all the information that we get, that the information is this. It's the progressive activists pushing a description of the far other side on the middle, and the devoted conservatives pushing a description of the far other side on the middle. So we get this real break between the reality of how much of us support these basic norms of democracy versus how much we think of the other side. A couple more points about it. Here's one example. The light is like, it's about immigration, and do you support completely open borders is the question, right? And on the left is like asking Republicans, what's the Democratic position on open borders? And Republicans say, perceptions in the blue are like, most all Democrats want completely open borders, right? And they ask Democrats, what's your perception of the Republican view on borders? And they say, well, we think most all the Republicans want completely closed borders. And then the reality is they're asking them what they think themselves, right? And what you see is a lot of commonality. About probably a third or more of both sides, Republicans and Democrats, have there's a place to meet in the middle about borders and immigration and all that kind of stuff. But our perception of the other is very extreme and uninformed. Right. The last one is, well, you know, if I really want to know what's going on, I'm going to ask an activist, somebody who posts on social media all the time, because they really must know what's going on. And this says, well, okay, have you shared political content on social media in the past year is the question, which is a pretty low barrier, right, of whether you're active on social media in the last year. Well, for those who've said yes, their perception gap, in other words, the likelihood they're wrong about the other side is 30%. And if you're just not doing social media and you don't care, you have a better idea of what the other side thinks than the activists, right? You people just who are not consumed by politics honestly have a better intuition about what's going on than those folks who are active all the time. The interaction of social media distorts perceptions of reality. And here's the last, I think, data slide. An interesting thing. Maybe I should ask you, because the odds are there'd be one of you who would agree with this. Do you think it's acceptable to assault a member of the other party? Like if you're a Republican, it's okay. And Democrats, 3.3% of Democrats, which is like 1 in 30, might think there might be a circumstance where you need to physically confront a member of the other party. And Republicans, about the same. But then what is your perception of the other party? Well, up on the top, Democrats on average think 58% of Republicans support assaulting someone across the party, but 3% of Republicans actually do. And then on the bottom, it would be Republicans on average think 61% of Democrats would assault someone in the other party, in the Republican Party, but in fact only 4% do, right? So our sense of the violent tendency of someone who disagrees with us politically is, you know, it's off by a factor of 20. We're 20 times more likely to get that one wrong, or 15 times more likely to get that wrong. So what do we do? I don't know about you, but I'm just going to go home and watch Netflix. But no, I am not going home and watching Netflix. Between now and election day, I'm actually doing a bunch of things about how to talk across political divides. And I just come up with 10 places or resources to learn how to listen and bridge and listen to the other side. These can all be found on a website or Google, or sign up for a daily or weekly newsletter. There's a group called Starts With Us, like Depolarization Starts With Us, is there what that means. There's a group called Living Room Conversations, which it challenges people to think in your neighborhood, someone who probably disagrees with you on an issue, and invite them into your living room to have a conversation and listen well. Dinners across difference. Same thing, let's have dinner with somebody who we think disagrees with us. I'm a member of the Braver Angels National Group. You can go to their website and sign up for a one-on-one conversation. They ask you a couple of questions about who you are. Are you red or blue, Republican, Democrat? You live in a rural area, urban area? And they will find someone who is opposite from you for a Zoom call and a conversation. And it's structured conversation, so you don't have to think of what to say. They give you sort of opening questions about what to say. I've done 4 or 5 one-on-one conversations with people. I actually did one, I've done 3 with a guy who's right outside Springfield, Ohio, never has eaten a cat or a dog, never has seen somebody eat a cat or a dog. But it's interesting to hear that, like, what's going on in that world, right? The Braver Angels, I super recommend Braver Angels. A project called the Listen First Project. StoryCorps, if you're a public radio person, StoryCorps has a whole theme about connecting with people who might be different. America Talks, Resetting the Table. The Constructive Dialogue Institute has curriculum especially for college students, which I spend a lot of time with. And More Like Us is a curriculum guide. And the last slide is, right. Other resources, there's central points that collect all of this information. And they have it ready for families or for individuals or for schools or whatever. The Greater Good Science Center or the Deutsch International Center for Cooperation and Conflict. But then what action steps can I take? And I'm just going to kind of leave them up there and open it up for questions if we have time. To me, the political system, politicians are called leaders. I think politicians are followers. I think, culture influences the political system. People running for public office have to sort of anticipate, hear, and respond to public demands. I think the public has allowed a sort of position takers and to run for public office, thinking that position taking is what we want our public officials to do. I think problem solving is what we want our public officials to do. So identify people who can reconcile differences, yourself included. The Braver Angels group, of which I've been a part for the last few years at the National Convention, I think every 3rd person was a marriage counselor, right? And they got to Braver Angels for 2 reasons. One, the skills of a good marriage counselor is really good same skills for 2 people who disagree with each other politically. But they also found that a lot of their clients a lot of their marital conflict was around political difference. And so I want to get to the source of this. And so they joined that. But any kind of counseling, therapy, find those people, encourage them to join one of the 2 political parties. at the local level. Getting in the local political party is easy to do. It's very easy to do. Both parties have empty precinct delegate slots across the county. They have monthly meetings that you could probably go to until they kick you out. But the political system needs reconcilers. It needs people who can enter the arena and can solve political problems. When the public expands its expectation that that's what public officials should be about, I actually think the political system can be responsive. Political parties change, political cultures change, people change. The local Democratic Party and the local Republican Party have morphed a lot in my 27 years of living in Kentwood and in Western Michigan. They can change again. And I think they actually can change to be responsive if enough of the public says, hey, what we really want are problem solvers and not position takers running for public office. And I hope some of you become candidates for public office. I've not officially done that other than a precinct delegate yet. But I'm running out of excuses. I'm retired and taking Social Security, and we're empty nesters, and we don't even have a dog right now. So I could really do that. But those resources too, if this is of interest to you, you want to follow, you can do everything from sign up and just get a daily and a weekly reminder about how to work across difference. Those are useful things to do, and just participate. I'm actually very encouraged about the political environment. You know, John McCain is famous for saying, you know, it's darkest just before it's completely black. But he was a bit of a pessimist, right? It's darkest just before the dawn. It is, I do think, and I'm an investor too. You want to buy low and sell high? Well, buy into the political system now, because it's low and it's cheap. It's going to go up. It really will go up. So I am optimistic that things will work out. All right. Well, thank you very much for this time.
Let's thank Doug. And for all of you who would like to ask a question that's here in our audience, we ask that you come and speak in the mic. You can also text me a question at 616-308-6560. If you're on our live stream, I'll monitor chat to pick up your questions there. And it looks like maybe a few of you are taking your time to think through your first question. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about how did we get to this point where our politicians became what you call position takers versus problem solvers? What was that shift? When did that shift happen? And kind of give us a little bit more context there.
Yeah, I have to admit I was probably, I was in Washington when some of those circumstances started. I had a first life on Capitol Hill from 1980 to 1995. I worked for Republican members of Congress, most of them from around here, Paul Henry and Fred Upton and others. But I also worked for a guy named Newt Gingrich, who really began to use the floor of the House and his leadership in the House Republican Conference to say we need to be strong about positions. We need to distinguish ourselves as Republicans from the Democratic Party and kind of assert difference and take positions that we think have majority support in order to gain the majority. And so the job of the congressman, members of Congress do lots of nonpartisan things. They do casework. They help bring money to a district. They help encourage businesses to move to districts. They help you out with your Social Security or your passport, or they convene other local officials to work on a project, to build the South Beltline or the Paul Henry Freeway. A lot of public works, et cetera, are very nonpartisan, non-divisive, and need to be collaborative work. the job description, partly because of social media and television, has somehow changed to diminish those activities and to expand on how to take a position and draw media attention. And I think that really did start with Newt Gingrich in the early 1990s and the mid 1990s, in the desire to gain majority status in Congress. But Democrats had been in the majority from 1954 to 1994, and then because of some of Gingrich's strategy, they became in the majority in 94. Political scientists now call what the Congress is a fragile majority, so that every election to both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party becomes a life or death matter, because the control of the chamber is contingent on the next election. And so that just causes everyone to think this is the most important election of our lifetime, and we lose everything if we lose. There's sports analogies, right? There is the Michigan State thing that everybody, all of their life energy is around those athletic contests, and they think they're life and death, and nobody else cares. I'm in the middle of the Hope Calvin rivalry that, honestly, no one outside of West Michigan even knows who these places are. It is not a matter of life and death. But politics has become that, and the most valued players in the political game are the most combative and most attention-drawing. But I do think it starts from the early 1990s.
Hi there.
Yeah.
So there are some issues that really shouldn't be partisan. And I have a background in actuarial science,
Yeah.
so I'm always worried about the Social Security system and the financial viability of it,
Right.
which is probably going to go bankrupt in about less than 10 years. So it seems like that should be a nonpartisan issue. We need to somehow fix the system rather than kick the can down the road.
Right.
So my question is, how do we get politicians to concentrate on issues that are really nonpartisan?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. So the question is, how do we get politicians to concentrate on issues that are really nonpartisan? I would say first, there is a lot of nonpartisanship that does go on. It doesn't get the news, but the Congress and the state legislature does pass budgets, annual budgets, and there's a lot of agreement to do those sorts of things. I would say critical issues that the nation needs addressed probably is fiscal policy generally, budget and spending. Certainly the cost of entitlement, Social Security and Medicare. Certainly probably a border policy, right? What to do with legal and illegal immigration, and an immigration set of laws that are 30 years old and need to be updated. There were ways in the past that sort of private, senior, respected public official commissions would be created, and they would have a package solution that would get imposed on the legislators who are always just worried only about the next election. I do think things like that have to happen, like a Social Security Commission. But we're just in we're in a feverish season. There are more people frightened, there are more people anxious, there are more people afraid. I do think, again, individual citizens can start to change their expectations for public officials. And I have some hope that a bipartisan commission on Social Security and Medicare, for example, could happen in the next 4 to 6 years. I know, I'm worried about it. I'm 67, I'm taking Social Security. I figured that, and I'm going to get it all out. But not everybody here is able to do that. So I think not today. It's just not the time. But I think we can sort of push the future if we take it upon ourselves to do that. Yeah. Hi, Tom.
Yeah, hi, nice to be here. I was a state rep, and the question I got you say that we're followers and not leaders, and half of that's right, because I had one constituent come to me, and I followed their lead on a tether bill, but I led the way to get the tether bill passed for people that were overpaying tether. They couldn't get their tether bill paid for. So I think that people that lead and they do follow. So I think it's half and half. It's
Right.
not just followers.
Yep. No, thanks for the comment, Tavi. I speak in gross generalizations. I do think we need better leadership at the national level on critical issues. I think issues that are not like the top 5, public, controversial, you have a lot of really terrific legislative leadership. And we always have had that. You can make progress on issues that are important, but people don't really care every day about. And I do think criminal justice reform can be sometimes some of those things. And I think those can be like warm-ups to issues where we can work together on issues that are more in front of more people. But I think, as you know, so much of fixing things in the political process is relationships with people that are developed over time, and that you trust others who are different from you, who are different party or different ideologies, but you do trust them, and that takes a lot of time. I personally think term limits are a really bad idea, because on really difficult issues, it takes 10 years to develop the kind of trust you need to have to fix a touchy problem, and many of the touchy problems we have. But yeah, good. Thank you.
Good evening. I recall that when Bob Dole lost the election to Clinton, the day after the election, he said it is our job as Republicans to make sure nothing gets done in the next 4 years. Now, I'm not sure that was the first time that was said by the losing candidate, but it stuck in my mind. And it appears to me that ever since that election, that's been the mantra of the losing party on a national basis. So while I believe everything of what you've said here is great ideas and things of that nature, there's got to be something larger, greater to have an impact on a national level that's going to make sure we don't go to work the next day to make sure nothing gets happened. Because it's because us that put them there, they don't care about that. They only care about keeping the election and keeping their seats in whatever they are.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. I actually think it was Mitch McConnell and Barack Obama where that comment was made. Okay. So Mitch took it from Bob Dole. Yeah, which is peculiar to me, because Bob Dole had a reputation for working really well across the aisle with people on food policy and foreign policy and military affairs. But thank you for that comment. We're probably still in I won't call it a death spiral, but we're in a very polarized point, emotionally, ideologically polarized, mostly unnecessarily. Yeah, thank you.
You've queued up my question perfectly.
Okay, good.
Given the polarization of our government and of the people, do you think the two-party system is still working for us? And do you think that, if not, there's any realistic hope of changing that?
I hate to say that I like political parties. Let me unpack that just a little bit. I think the main function of political parties, a very important function of political parties, is to bring into the system people who are alienated from the system. And gross generalizations, I do think that the Democratic Party has a history of bringing in certain groups who are at the margin of society and participation into the system. Racial and ethnic minorities, sexual and orientation and gender identity minorities more recently, right? And I think a sympathetic way to look at the Republican Party is to bring in the alienated working class, mostly white people, but working class people of all races who feel the system is rigged against them. I think we're at a tough place there, but we don't appreciate that function of political parties, and both parties have done that to some extent. I would say there has to be a way to break up the ideological rigidity of both political parties. So things like ranked choice voting, or different ways to structure primaries in both parties, or mechanisms like that. I do think, I won't call them third parties, but there has to be more mechanisms to change what it means to be a Democrat and change what it means to be a Republican, to be more inclusive of people in the frustrated middle. Because a lot of the issues around social issues are just not negotiable issues, right? You can negotiate the size of a budget. You can't really negotiate a view of sexual identity or abortion. And so there has to be ways to break up the rigid ideology of both parties. But their main function, I do think, is to socialize, bring people in, and sort of calm some of those people down so we don't have public unrest. They're not perfect institutions, yeah. But things like ranked choice voting or different ways to do primaries, I think, are good ideas. So thank you, yeah.
What you just said about you like the political parties, it feels like you have two political parties that have a stranglehold on everything, because and if we talk about the radical middle, there's probably
Right.
a lot of parties, which leads to this question: campaign finance laws, Citizens United, and the lobbyists. If you think that lobbyists could somehow be taken out of the equation, do you suppose that the middle we might get away from these extremists a little bit?
Yeah, so I think money, thank you for the question about how to reform the political system and could we get rid of lobbyists. I think the biggest engines or the accelerants of sort of emotional partisanship are actually, I would call them the party professionals. Not really lobbyists, but people who make money running campaigns. Fundraisers, people who make advertisements, consultants, pollsters, people like that. There's so much money thrown into politics, but it goes in the pockets of the professional consulting campaigning class, and you earn money by scaring people, and you get votes by scaring people about the other side, right? And so that's really the professional campaign class is, to me, is a larger problem than a lobbyist. I think lobbyists fundamentally want a legislature to work so that they can get their piece of legislation. That would be my comment. I would just focus more really on how campaigns are run and the professionals who run them. And in America, we have elections every 2 years. And if you count the off-year elections, we have elections every year. So full-time job to scare people with money. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Kaylee. I wanted to actually know if you know of any additional resources where I could learn more about that, like middle 26% that's really disengaged.
The disengaged folk. So, I would go to the Greater Good Science Center website, and they have a weekly newsletter, and they're about 50 researchers in Berkeley, California, but They do 4 or 5 articles every week in my newsfeed about how to engage folks who are disengaged and things like that. So they're a super great source of ideas and very practical projects and practical things to do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Doug, I want to ask one more about political parties. In the World Affairs Council, we hear from a lot of international diplomats and about their political systems. So the Dutch ambassador to the United States was here in the spring. They have 12 political parties. They talk about the three-ring circus that it is, of course, but in some ways it felt like, well, if there are that many political parties, maybe of all those tribes that you showed up on the screen, people have to learn to compromise because nobody gets a majority and people have to form coalitions. But I'm just wondering, that creates its own problems, of course, but as a person who likes political parties, maybe you can compare and contrast a little bit.
Compared to a lot of European countries, we're geographically a large place. I would say political parties in the United States are incredibly local. If you go to a state convention for the Michigan Democratic Party, or you go to a state convention to the Michigan Republican Party, you think, we have 83 different political parties in Michigan. Every county is weird, except for Kent County. But there are factions within even state parties. So to some extent, those, and in Michigan, there's typically, in the Republican Party, there's the kind of holier than thou West Michigan Republican, right? Republican, Christian, but that pairs. There's sort of the middle part of the state, rural, small town, Oakland County, kind of secular wealthy, and then a few other spots. And so really, you look at the Michigan Republican Party, it's 4 or 5 different parties under an umbrella. The Democratic Party, similarly, there's ethnic concentrations, there are labor union concentrations, there are highly progressive, ideologically progressive concentrations. And conflict gets resolved within those political parties too, much in a similar way than the 12 parties in the Dutch coalition, right? I think people don't see that because it does happen. All those things are really behind closed doors or in far odd places on Saturdays where nobody goes. But in America, state parties, county party, a county is the core political party entity. And a lot of that factionalism happens within a state. Conflict resolution,
This has all been very fascinating, but we have to end, so let's give Doug one more hand.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.